So what is mastery? Ambrose et al. Define mastery as the attainment of a high degree of competence within a particular area. They explain that this competence can include discrete skills, such as how to use a Bunsen burner in chemistry, as well as competence with content knowledge, such as the dates of particular historical periods. And it includes competence using extensive knowledge and skills within a complex disciplinary domain, such as thermodynamics. One important point to note about this competence is that having it does not automatically help you share it with others. In fact, having mastery of something can make it even more challenging to teach, as we'll see on the next slide. As teachers, it's important to note how we and our students move from novice to experts in our disciplines. This image from Ambrose et al. Shows that trajectory. We all begin with unconscious incompetence, where we have not yet developed any skills and don't yet know what we need to learn. We then move to conscious incompetence, where we're now aware of what we do not know, and therefore what we need to learn to gain competence. Next, we develop conscious competence, where we have now begun to develop the competence we need, but still need to take steps to think and act deliberately. Finally, after much time and practice, we end up with unconscious competence, where we now use the skills we've developed so automatically and instinctively that we are no longer consciously aware of what we know or do. Because most teachers are at the level of unconscious competence, we have what is called an expert blind spot when it comes to recognizing the component skills our students need to learn. So we meet our students' unconscious incompetence with our own unconscious competence, which makes it difficult for us to teach and learn from one another. To overcome our expert blind spots and guide students' unconscious incompetence toward more conscious competence, Ambrose et al. Recommend that we help students identify and practice the component skills they need to acquire mastery. So what are component skills? Component skills are the discrete skills and knowledge we need to use in order to achieve mastery. For example, Ambrose et al. Offer the case of mastering statistical analysis. To practice statistical analysis with mastery, one must be able to recognize the relevant variables and the ability to categorize these variables according to types. To achieve mastery, students need to be able to identify the component skills that we take for granted as experts. Ambrose et al. Point out that to teach complex skills systematically, without missing pieces, instructors must be able to unpack or decompose complex tasks. So once we have identified the component skills of whatever we want our students to master, we can help students recognize or understand what the component skills are, and then practice those that they are weak in. An important consideration for practicing component skills is whether to ask students to practice these skills in isolation or in the context of the whole task. The benefits of practicing skills in isolation, rather than in the context of the whole task, depend on the task, the learning objectives, and individual students' levels of competence. For simple tasks, or those where components cannot be realistically extracted from the whole, practicing the task as a whole can be the most effective for student learning. For complex tasks, where the task can easily be divided into discrete component parts, Ambrose et al. Recommend asking students to practice those skills in isolation, and then progressively combine them into a whole task practice. This brings us to the topic of integrating component skills. As Ambrose et al. Explain, mastery requires both the decomposition of the component skills we just mentioned and also their eventual recomposition, as well as the chance to practice these skills in combination with one another. However, students' ability to integrate component skills is limited by their cognitive load, or the total information processing demands imposed by a given task or set of tasks. When the cognitive load of combining the skills is exceeded, students cannot access the other cognitive resources they need to complete a task and thus will fail. This is why students may sometimes succeed using different tasks in isolation, but then fail when they're asked to practice them in combination with one another. So how do we help students integrate component skills successfully? Research has shown that scaffolding, where instructors temporarily reduce some of the cognitive load so the students can focus on particular dimensions of what they are learning, can be helpful. As instructors, we can identify which demanding aspects of a task are related to the skills our students need to learn, and which may be disruptive to or distracting from those learning goals. Removing extraneous load or aspects of a task that make it difficult to complete, but that are unrelated to what students need to learn, is helpful for students. For example, if students do not need to learn to memorize large sums of numbers for a particular learning outcome, allowing them to use a calculator to solve math problems will help reduce the cognitive demand on their brains when working on the problem. However, Ambrose et al. Warn that reducing load that is germane to what students need to learn will be counterproductive, so identifying which skills are extraneous and which are germane is important to successful integration. Once students have been able to integrate component skills successfully, students must also know when and where to use component skills they have learned. Otherwise, they may not be able to apply them to other relevant tasks, or they might apply the wrong skill for that context. The application of skills learned in one context to a different new context is called transfer. Transfer is said to be near when the learning context and the transfer context are similar. And transfer is said to be far when the learning context and the transfer context are different. For example, applying a statistics formula learned in a statistics course a year ago to a report for a current public policy class may be said to be a far transfer, versus applying a statistics formula from one class to another. To help students learn to transfer their skills into different contexts, including far contexts, Ambrose et al. Recommend that as instructors, we teach for transfer. That is, give students a broad range of applications to practice their knowledge and skills. Given this research on transfer, integration, and component skills, what can we as instructors do to help our students develop mastery? Some strategies to help students identify and practice with component skills include pushing past our expert blind spots and working to identify component skills. One way to do this is to ask a TA or a graduate student, who are more likely to be at the level of conscious competence, to help break down a task's components for us. Another way is to ask someone outside of the discipline to review materials and see where key component skills might be missing for students. Once we've identified key component skills, we can bring them to students' attention and help them practice. We can diagnose students' weak or missing component skills and, when possible, give them isolated practice with the weak or missing skills, then connect that practice to the context of the whole task. Some strategies to facilitate integration and transfer are to discuss different contexts and conditions for application. Give students opportunities to apply skills or knowledge in different contexts. Ask students to identify contexts for application of what they are learning, particularly in the context of other work in their major or in their future career. And finally, we can help students practice transfer in our courses from day one by asking them to draw on their prior knowledge or skills and identify how they might apply these to what they will learn in our course. How has the principle of developing mastery helped you understand your students and their learning? We asked this question to a group of educators. In their responses, you'll hear references to some of the strategies we just mentioned, and you'll hear other strategies as well.